Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Candidates Forum. I'm Richard Turner, Executive Director for the Community Media Center. Tonight's forum is being held at our studios here at the Community Media Center in Westminster, Maryland. The program is being streamed live on cable channel 19 and 23, as well as on our website at carrollmediacenter.org. Now, the program will be rebroadcast on cable channels 19 and 23 starting after April 24th. And the Community Media Center has partnered with the Carroll County Times to provide this programming as a public service to the community. Our goal is to establish an equal platform for political advocacy and provide local residents with information about individuals seeking public office in the upcoming primary election. At this time, I'll turn over the program to our moderator for this evening, Mr. Wayne Carter, who's the editor of the Carroll County Times, and he will explain the rules and open tonight's forum. Wayne?
All right. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, candidates, for joining us here tonight and to our audience here. As the moderator this evening, the first thing I'll do is go down the line here and introduce all of our candidates. Each candidate will then have 2 minutes for an opening statement, and then following the introductions, I'll ask a question for each candidate. Everyone is going to get the same question. We'll start with Miss Allison, and then the second question will start with Miss Battaglia, et cetera, et cetera. All the candidates will answer the identical question. Just to be clear, this is not a debate. This is an informational forum. And at the conclusion of the question and answer period, each candidate will have 1 minute for a summary statement. All the responses are going to be timed, and our timekeeper will give candidates a signal when 30 seconds remains. The timekeeper will ring a bell 2 to 3 seconds after the final stop signal is given, and the moderator may immediately interrupt the candidate and discontinue the statement or answer at that time. The questions are going to be a mixture of pre-prepared questions, those that were submitted in advance by the public via email, as well as several questions have already come in from tonight's live audience. Tonight's forum is being recorded, so we please ask that everyone in the audience turn off their cell phones, put them on silence, candidates too. And we also ask that attendees please refrain from applause or making noise during the forum or doing anything visible or audible to express support or opposition to any candidate during the forum. And with that, let us begin. So we'll start with Miss Cathey Allison, who will have an opportunity to give her 2-minute opening statement.
Thank you. I respect and admire the dedicated work of our Carroll County teachers, administrators, and the many employees who make our school system excel. And I'm enthusiastic about personally contributing to the value of the education that our children receive. But in education today, there are many conflicting messages interfering with the clarity of a thorough, wholesome academic education and knowledge of America and its ideals. America is unique and critically important into the world today. As our children grow, they must be prepared with the foundational tools that equip them as adults to take over the important task of managing our government and restraining it within its proper bounds. This will allow them to freely pursue their own personal lives as adults. Our Republican form of government is a subject that must be faithfully taught in our young people's history and civics lessons, so that they can develop a proper understanding of Americanism. Americanism is as important a subject and maintaining the breadth and depth as in mathematics, science, English, arts, and the literature. I hope have the opportunity to work with our excellent board school system to retain the best educational expertise possible to raise up the next generations of our county's future. Let's work together to keep our classrooms flourishing with inspirational respect and understanding of Americanism, and each citizen's responsibility to manage our rightful form of government. Let's enable our children to successfully preserve liberty when it is their turn to take the helm.
Ms. Tara Battaglia is up next.
Good evening. My name is Tyra Battaglia. Yes, it looks like Tara, but it's pronounced Tyra. I've been born and raised in Carroll County, going on 40 years now. I am a graduate from Westminster High School from 1996. And I also attended Carroll Community College and studied elementary education for special needs for some time. I have been involved with Charles Carroll Rec Council, preserving the Charles Carroll community, Pleasant Valley 4-H Club, Girl Scouts. I'm very involved in the communities. I wanted to run for office because I want to make sure students are taken care of, and our students are kept as a priority in our schools. I want to make sure that our communities are a priority. No school should be closed that's in an isolated area. Once that occurs, many things start to fall apart, whether it's the community aspect, programs, friendships. And I know many talk about how military families, they move around. Yes, that's true, and the children do adjust. But it does take time, but they also do it as a family, and they do it together. And when you divide communities, unfortunately, they don't get to do that together. They don't get to be with the rest of their friends. They're all separated. So one of my big things is I want to make sure that communities are definitely kept together, and they withhold what schools are about is being in an environment where you're supported. That's it for now.
All right. Thank you. Next up is Ms. Patricia Ann Dorsey.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Patricia Dorsey, candidate for the Carroll County Board of Education. It is my privilege to share information with you this evening. Teaching and learning have been lifelong passions. I am a product of Carroll County Public Schools, having been a member of the first graduation class from South Carroll High School. The passion for teaching and learning resulted in a 39-year career in the Carroll County Public School System. I was a second and third grade teacher at William Winchester Elementary School, a third grade team leader at Westminster Elementary School, a Title I resource teacher, assistant principal of Eldersburg Elementary School, and principal of Tawnytown Elementary, William Winchester Elementary, and Friendship Valley Elementary Schools. During my service to Carroll County Public Schools, I worked tirelessly on behalf of all students. I have also been a parent of our school system, having 2 sons who graduated from Carroll County Public Schools. The passion for teaching and learning also inspired me to achieve a Master of Education degree from Western Maryland College, which is now McDaniel College, and a Doctor of Education degree from the University of Maryland, College Park, majoring in education policy, planning, and administration. I respect our teachers, instructional assistants, and everyone involved in the education of our students. My experiences and education enhance my understanding of the functioning of a school system and local school board. As an aspiring member, my priorities are enhancing safe environments, acquiring competitive salaries for staff, supporting educational programs, and recruiting and retaining quality teachers and staff so that we would have a diverse workforce.
All right. Thank you. Next up, Ms. Muri Duppen.
Good evening. First, I would like to express my appreciation for everything that the Carroll County Times and the Community Media Center are doing to inform and engage the public in this year's elections. Tonight's turnout is really terrific, and I'm sure that this audience, viewers at home, and those who watch on TV or online later are also grateful. My name is Muri Duppen. I'm very excited for this opportunity to tell you more about myself. As you get to know me, I think you will learn that I not only have a unique name, but that I am uniquely qualified to serve on the Board of Education. I promise that I will always be putting students first. My husband Patrick and I moved to Carroll County in 2004, the same year our daughter started kindergarten. She is a college student now, and our son is a sophomore at South Carroll High School. Unlike them, I attended 8 different schools growing up, across the country and overseas because my father was in the Navy. I went on to earn a Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the College of William and Mary in Virginia. And right after that, I worked as a wildlife educator in a small zoo. That was a really cool job, but I did move on to a career in marketing and membership management at scientific societies. As I did when my kids were very young, I have spent much of their teen years opting out of the full-time workforce to be at home. This enabled me to embark on local community volunteer advocacy, primarily fighting for our schools. I also helped establish a grassroots group, Vocal Carroll County. Becoming a candidate for the Board of Education seemed like the next logical step for me. I have 4 straightforward goals for our school system: student-focused decisions with learning first, continuous academic improvement for all students, attracting, support, keep, and empower our teachers and other employees so that new graduates are ready for success. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up, Mr. Jason Helton.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Helton from Hampstead. I've lived there for about 10 years. And first off, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. And number 2, I've had a chance to get to meet some of these other candidates over the past couple of weeks and months. And while we may disagree on some things, I can very safely say that every one of us that I've had a chance to talk to really are trying to do what's best for our schools. We really have the right intentions. So this is a great group to do that, and I'm proud to be sitting here up with them, although I feel like I'm hosting the news or something with the suit and all. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I have 4 wonderful children, 2 of whom are students at Hampstead Elementary School, where I serve as their representative on the advisory council. I've also served Carroll County for about the better part of 4 years on the managing the Cable Regulatory Service, the Cable Regulatory Commission. So I do a lot of work with keeping things going there. But my focus for running the Board of Education, for getting onto the Board of Education, is to focus on my children and everybody else's children. I want to make sure that my kids have a wonderful school experience. And the way we can do that is we need to stop closing schools if we can. You know, we need to find creative ways of being fiscally responsible. How can we find better ways of cutting the budget without cutting the schools? I'm a huge proponent of technical education. As somebody who benefited from a technical education myself, there is a ton of options that we can start exploring to really build up the technical education. You know, my goal is to see us students leaving school not necessarily with a ton of, getting ready for school debt for colleges and things like that, but I would love to see us position students to start a career instead as an alternative. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, sir. Next up, Mr. Doug Howard.
Good evening. I want to first thank the Carroll County Times and the Community Media Center for being here and for everybody else that's participating. 6 months ago, I would not have expected to be here, and yet I'm very proud to be a candidate for the Board of Education. I have 6 children that are all products of Carroll County schools and 2 stepchildren as well. So I've seen the school over a long period of time. In fact, we had a 19-year continuous run at Carrolltown Elementary. I think that's some sort of a record. But right now, there are a lot of outside pressures on what has already been a very, very good school system, but I believe has the chance to kind of sink to a level of mediocrity because of those outside pressures. We have pressures on funding. We have the challenges of changing curriculum. We're going through a redistricting process. We're about to have a new superintendent of schools. We're about to have, at least essentially, a new board of county commissioners. There are a lot of pressures on what's going on, and frankly, I think we need a much stronger Board of Education. We need a Board of Education that can not only lead the curriculum effort and lead the education message in the community, but be a strong advocate at the state level and make sure we get the resources we need. To me, this all comes down to resources, the curriculum, and safe schools. And I think that there's lots of ways that we can build on the things that have been done. During my 7.5 years as county commissioner, I believe I've been a very strong advocate for education and education funding. But in taking up this charge, it would be even more important to make sure that we are not continually changing curriculum, but we're building on the successes that we have, that we are making sure that our message is heard and we get the resources we need to be successful. And at the end of the day, all decisions start and end with what's best for the student and the teacher in the classroom. That's what I propose to do as a member of the Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Kenneth Kiler.
I want to thank the Community Media Center and Carroll County Times for this opportunity. I live with my wife Rhonda in Manchester, and I'd be very honored to represent all of you in the county on the Board of Education. I've been active in various community activities, but with a career in construction until now, there was no time to run for public office. I'm new at this, but I now want to get involved. I'm a lifelong resident of the county. Rhonda and I have 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Rhonda, I, and all 3 children are products of Carroll County Public Schools. All 3 have graduate degrees. We placed importance on education early and still do. I have a BA in math from Washington College and took additional classes at Western Maryland and was actually met all the requirements to be certified to teach. I joined the Guard. I say joined, I was the last week of the last draft this country had. I completed Officer Candidate School and the Officer Basic course and spent 8 years in the Guard and left as a first lieutenant. I've worked all my life in construction. I started working at C.J. Miller as summer help during high school and college and went on to stay there and spend 26 years as their vice president. I left there and went to York, Pennsylvania to Stuart Tate and have now spent 13 years as executive vice president there. At both companies, I was active in budgeting, finance, estimating, contract management, project management, hiring and managing employers, and more. I feel strongly that all the skills I acquired through this and various community activities and opportunities will transfer well to the Board of Ed. Half of our taxes go to the school system. We need fiscal responsibility and transparency. I feel we can continue to develop a great school system while maintaining our current tax rates. We must promote common sense, transparency, and the redistricting and school closures. By managing the school system's
Thank you, sir.
properties wisely, we
Thank
can
you.
attract highly qualified teachers.
All right. Ms. Mary Kowalski.
Hi, my name is Mary Kowalski. I'd like to start by thanking the sponsors of our debate and also greet my fellow candidates. I'm looking forward to hearing their ideas as well as sharing some of my own ideas with you today. I have a master's degree in elementary education, 17 years of experience in Carroll County Public Schools from 1999 to 2016. I'm also the proud parent of a 2015 graduate from Carroll County Public Schools who is now studying political science at Towson University. She's kind of a chip off the old block and grew up listening constantly to around the table political conversations. I've been a citizen activist and volunteer for many years, and for over 12 years, I've regularly attended and participated in Board of Commissioner meetings. I ran for commissioner in 2006 and 2010. For the past 5 years, I've shifted my focus to improving our county school system, and I've run for Board of Ed in 2014, 2016, and now in 2018. If I'm elected, I will focus. I just want to back up for a second and say, as you can see, I've run for office 5 times, and I've been sort of pondering, reflecting on this today. And I think that's the way we get things done, by having that staying kind of a thing. If I'm elected, I will focus on proper planning in our capital budget, the lack of which is wreaking havoc on our budget. If I'm elected, I will be a strong and effective leader who brings knowledge and expertise to the Board of Ed. I ask for your vote on June 26, 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Bob Lord.
Hello, my name is Bob Lord. I'd like to thank all the other candidates for their willingness to run for this office. I am the president of the Carroll County Board of Education. Before being elected in 2014, I've been involved with the school system for many years. I've been a classroom volunteer, an active PTA member, and served on various CCPS committees. I also co-founded a grassroots advocacy organization, Carroll Values Education. I'm also a Girl Scout volunteer, a graduate of the inaugural Carroll County Citizens Police Academy. I am a longtime Carroll County resident with 2 children currently attending Carroll County Public Schools. It has been a busy term. I've worked very hard despite many challenges to improve the environment that allows our students to excel. Thanks to the involvement of the families in our community, our students continue to outperform their peers across the state in many areas. We have a higher graduation rate than any other county in the state. My proudest accomplishment so far are budgets that fund our negotiated agreements every year that I've been on the board. Our school system is successful because of our great educators. We must continue to do what it takes to attract and retain them. I take my responsibility for student safety very seriously. We have implemented the student data privacy policy to protect our students' information online, and we have reviewed and updated board policies for student and staff equality and diversity. We support the increased law enforcement presence in our schools to make safety a top priority. And finally, I'm proud for the improved relationship with our state delegation, as well as our federal delegation. Over my term, I've made several trips to Annapolis and to Washington to support and testify on education. I'm looking forward to tonight's forum. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Before we get to our first question, just wanted to address Mr. Donald Garmer, who's also running. He informed us he had a prior commitment, would not be able to attend tonight. And another candidate, Michael Yoke, had chosen to suspend his campaign and is therefore also not with us tonight. So let's begin with our first question. We'll start again with Miss Allison. And remember, you have 2 minutes to answer the question. Something that seems to be on everyone's mind these days is school safety. So with that in mind, what strategies do you recommend and support for safety in our schools?
Interesting question. I have been reviewing what the General Assembly has been passing and watching as the governor is signing these bills, and I am not. Some of the bills, it's hard to detect whether they have been signed by the governor or since the session has closed. But indeed, one in this capacity, that being on the Board of Education, we are committed to following our regulations and our statutes. So as far as the safety, it looks very promising. It looks like we might have a little more debt coming our way, but there are many programs and many laws that are being passed to adjust, and the school board will be examining what they have presented.
Okay. Ms. Battaglia?
So I have been visiting many of our schools in the county. One thing that I have noticed is there is not consistency with the security that we do have. Yes, all the doors are locked. That is definitely, bottom line, done. But how you present yourself when you get to the school is something I think that we need to be very consistent on. When you press the buzzer, they should, can I help you? You tell them who you are, and then go from there and go into the office. Some schools, you press the buzzer and they just let you in. But others, I have found, and I can tell you Westminster High was probably the best one I've seen. They have little booths outside, literally, like the little ticket booth. And you had to do everything there before they let you into the building, and I thought that was the best security system we have probably in the school system right now. So we just need to make sure that we're consistent when a visitor is at the schools. I did actually see some of the budget today from the county commissioners regarding the SROs, so that is something that we are working on as a county to make sure that we can have the security resource officers in our school system. Our police departments do a very good job with monitoring our schools. They do property checks on a basis. Many of the principals have phone numbers for the officers in the area, so if there is a problem, they can contact them immediately. So our county does very, very well with the safety that we have, their school safety. I think what we have is, we can improve, but what we have is really good.
Okay. All right, Ms. Dorsey.
School safety certainly is an utmost concern that should be on all of our minds, and I'm happy to see that there is recent Maryland legislation that's directed towards school safety strategies. One of the pieces of that legislation is that beginning by September of this year, 2018, all of our Maryland schools are either going to have the security resource officers in place, or else they're going to have access to emergency services. And that's really huge when you think of all of the schools, all of the public schools throughout the state of Maryland having that as a resource. I think that's huge. There are also going to be grants available so that we can assess our current situations and be able to move forward with making our schools more safe. And there's a lot going on as far as the Maryland Center for School Safety is concerned. One of the other pieces is certainly assessing our students and seeing if they have special needs, and trying to build in some support for students who appear to be at risk of possibly creating some threats to our safety. So we want to have resources in place to assist those students. And again, I just think we're headed in the right direction. And as I said, it's very huge what they've come up with now as far as this current legislation is concerned. And I know there are many pieces to it. Some things are to take place by September of 2018 and others into 2019 and 2020, so it's a lot to sort of wrap our heads around as far as all of those details are concerned, but I think we're really headed in the right direction with making sure that all of our facilities are safe.
Okay. Ms. Duppen.
Thank you. I had addressed the Board of Education on the issue of school safety and also written a letter to the editor of the Carroll County Times previously to sort of share some of my thoughts about this. I think for the most part, Carroll County Public Schools already does a very good job for student safety. We have a supervisor of school security and emergency management who is highly qualified and does a great job. The staff at Central Office has a good relationship with law enforcement already, even before the Maryland Safe to Learn Act was passed right at the end of the legislature. That act was right at the end. The school system, I think, is still getting a handle on just what that's going to mean and what that's going to look like, and things that are mandates that might not be fully funded. We're going to have to take a look at budgets and figure out the way to address those things. I do think school resource officers serve a good purpose generally, but I think that they're going to be expensive. And it's hard to suggest that maybe something is not necessarily exactly the right path to take because it sounds like you don't support student safety, and I absolutely do. But as I said in remarks that I made previously, there's what looks safe to people from the outside and what is actually safe, and what gives you the return on both the expense, the inconvenience, and other things. But some of the things that at least look safe to outsiders don't necessarily feel any safer to students. The more hardening of schools we do, the more they can actually seem like prisons, which is not a nurturing learning environment. So what I would like to see is for our Security Advisory Council, security staff to revisit all of the procedures we have in place now, look at how various changes might come into that, reassess what is really needed, what the different costs are, and go through a process to come up with a good plan, working with the commissioners and law enforcement. And also I want to say that hearing the student voice is very important on this, especially at the high school level.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Helton.
All right, so, I think we've heard a lot about what the state's going to do and what they're going to do on the federal level, but I want to focus on what we can actually do in our schools. First things first, I work in IT, and I do a lot of work with security in IT. One of the things that we do is we probe our systems to make sure that they are impenetrable. We just did a drill back at Johns Hopkins last week to explore what would happen if something happened. What we could do, and I'm not sure what the county is currently doing with this, but we should have somebody working for the schools who can sit there and probe these buildings, whose job it is to run these random security audits. like Tyra was saying, make sure that we are using consistency every place that we're going to. You know, it may be as simple as locking a door or making sure that a door or a window is locked that prevents tragedy. So by performing these random audits, by checking and seeing what we can do ourselves and not depend on higher ups to make decision, I think is a step in the right direction. The other thing that we need to focus on is the students' health, in that what is causing these factors to start, these violent acts to start happening. You know, as a kid, I was bullied, and my school gave me a mentor to help me deal with that. You know, how hard would it be, how expensive would it be to sit there and see somebody, a student who is in trouble, who needs help, and find a teacher who'd be willing to sit down and talk with them and help him or her? You know, we have lots of wonderful teachers who are dedicated and want to help, and this is just a very easy way of just trying to open those lines of communication and take the students seriously. You know, finding out what is driving them, what their fears are. We need to make sure that we're listening to them. They're the ones who are living in this world now, not us.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Howard.
So I believe this is one of the areas where my experience can bring a unique perspective to the discussion. So first of all, we have the highest responsibility for making sure our students are safe and secure, not just as parents and leaders in the community, but also because if we're dedicated to education, you cannot learn in an environment if you're fearful, if you're distracted, if you don't feel secure in that environment. So we have to be very creative in the way that we do it. I don't want schools that are prisons, but I want schools that are protected. We have excellent folks in our system that are working hand in hand with the police, and we have lots of things that we can build on. But we got to be realistic about what the situation is. The simple fact is we were having meetings with the superintendent and the sheriff and had already committed to SROs before it even became legislation at the state level. The second fact is the legislation that passed at the state level, which is well-intentioned and sounds very good, will not offer anywhere near the resource Carroll County needs to execute it. So we might have a more cordial relationship with the delegation, but we do not have a more effective relationship in actually getting the resources we need for the things that we're going to be able to do. They're talking about $10 million statewide, of which we might get a couple $100,000. We've already, amongst the commissioner's budget right now, put in the money that we're going to need to cover the SROs that are being mandated, because it's not enough to hope for and wish for these things. You got to have the resource behind it. At the end of the day, we need to realize preparing for what we saw on television as what's already happened is not what the next attack is going to look like. So what we need to do is not come up with our own amateur ideas or look at what's on Facebook and those kinds of things. We need to give the Security Council and the professionals the resources and then the latitude to do what they need to do. And we cannot discuss all our security measures in detail in public if you really want to protect the school system. We have to put faith in the professionals and give them the resources to protect not only the students, but our school personnel.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Kiler.
We've heard so much about this lately, and for the record, I don't feel teachers should be armed. I'm not sure I feel schools should be gun-free either. They need to be restricted, but not gun-free. We need the presence of the sheriff deputies there. We need school resource officers, and I think they should be trained and armed, and not in a policeman's uniform, in a coat and tie. But I also think we focus so much, as a couple of the other candidates have said, on what we see on TV and what happens. Carroll County schools are relatively safe compared to a lot of the areas. But I think the thing we miss, we need behavior specialists all the way down at the elementary level, working with these kids, working with their families. We need crisis counselors. We need to try to avoid the problem instead of just have somebody there with a gun to react to it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Kowalski.
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy that this question was the first question asked tonight. I see it as one of the top issues in terms of importance. You know, here a month or two ago, we just had this tragic school shooting in Florida with 17 students killed by someone who was able to come right into the school with 1,000 or give or take students, young people, our children, our most precious resource, with an AR-15, a military-style weapon, right into the school. and kill 17 students and injure I don't know how many. So this is not a new issue. It's something our nation has been dealing with for, I don't know, a few decades now. And we need to keep it on the front burner. We need to find the money to get this done. And I don't feel that we can sit back, put it on the back burner, and somehow feel that that we're safe. I don't think we're safe anywhere in this country when we've got AR-15s out on the street, military-style weapons that can fall easily into the hands of civilians who may be psychologically unbalanced. So I think that's one of the things we need to do things at the local level, but I also want to coordinate at the federal level to reinstate the ban. We had a ban on these weapons. We need to reinstate them. I want to say I'm not against the Second Amendment. I'm a conservative Republican candidate. I am strongly in favor of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, but we need to have reasonable, common sense parameters, and we need to protect our students and our citizens. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Lord.
Thank you. I will say, start out, that we have a wonderful relationship with our local government and our police force and emergency services. I'm fortunate enough to sit on the Security Advisory Council. We perform audits throughout the year. I won't go into detail about that because of security reasons. But all those recommendations come back to the Security Council, and that is comprised of our law enforcement, emergency services, staff, principals. Even we have custodians that sit on this committee, and this is discussed and everything. I do support the SROs. I'm surprised that we haven't had them. We've been very fortunate in this county not to have a problem within our schools, but we've come to a time and an age that this now needs to be done. I sit on the legislative committee for MABE, which is the Maryland Boards of Education, and we have this discussion all the time of SROs in other counties and how it benefits them and how it's paid for also. This new legislation that just got passed, it's still being fleshed out. We really don't even know the details of what it's really going to mean. So as time goes on, there might be some funding attached to it, there might not be. But I do think that our best approach in Carroll County is to start with SROs at our high school level that also monitor middle and elementary schools. But I think we need to take a proactive approach with crisis counselors, bringing them back, and also behavioral specialists at the middle school and the elementary school. We need to take a proactive approach to get to these children first. I think our danger lies mostly within of these children. You know, let's take care of them there in the building. Thank you.
Very good. All right, for our next question, we'll start with Ms. Battaglia. And this question concerns teacher salaries. Given the financial situation facing Carroll County Public Schools and assuming that no significant changes to the state funding formula is coming immediately, where does improving teacher salaries rank as a priority for you and why? And if you believe it needs improvement, how do you propose doing so?
Teacher salaries are important. You work, you deserve to get paid for what you do. Bottom line, that's with anybody. The problem is we have in this county is finding a way to pay them. The Kerwin Commission brought up, and it's actually something I even possibly thought about, and I'm like, I don't know if it could happen or not, but the Kerwin Commission actually brought it up, was what if the teacher salaries went back to the state level, where they were considered a state employee? I see pros and cons with that. I think it's something that could be done, especially on the state level. Funding could come from the casino money, which hopefully does come back to what it was supposed to be for. And maybe the county can supplement it a little bit after that, whether it be bonuses or to help with funding for their classrooms. County level, it's hard to do. We're strapping, and I know, they say we got to close schools in order to give teacher salaries, but when you do that, you end up hurting the students, and then there's not a guarantee that that teacher might have a job in another school. So we do need to be very careful with how we propose what we're going to give, teacher salaries. It does need to be done. But I can't promise a teacher that, yes, I'm going to give you a raise, because I can't. I can't make that guarantee. I would love for them to. Get them where they need to be, the actual teachers. But I can't make that guarantee.
Dr. Dorsey.
I think all of our teachers and staff members deserve competitive salaries. As far as improving the salaries, it ranks very high. It's a very top priority as far as I am concerned. When you get quality teachers and quality staff members, that's really going to affect the instruction that's provided in the classrooms. And we really want our kids to continue to excel and do well. Well, we need to make sure that we have those best persons in front of them delivering instruction on a daily basis. One of the main things that I can think of that we have to always do to try to keep competitive salaries on the forefront is to make sure that it's prioritized. I mean, in the school system, we certainly have many needs, and although we can't address and fill all the needs, at least if we make some of these items priorities and just say that we're going to focus on making sure that our staff members are receiving competitive salaries, even if it means not doing some of our other programs or funding some of the other programs. I think that's what we have to do until we can get to the point where all of our staff members receive competitive salaries.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Duppen.
This is definitely a top priority for me. Having come from the nonprofit sector, I'm familiar with pursuing a profession where your pay is not your primary motivator. You are driven by a mission to do something that you think has value beyond what your compensation is. So no, teachers and other educators and other school staff do not get in it for the money. But it is very difficult to stay in it if the compensation is not at least within a certain range of competitiveness with what you might be able to make elsewhere working for other counties. Carroll County is fortunate to be able to offer a value proposition for teachers that includes very safe schools, very supportive communities, parents, great people around, great kids. But it's very hard to stay in one place and stay motivated if the entire, all of those other things that go into your job satisfaction are also stressful. Teachers also don't have other resources because of funding issues. They don't have the professional development that they want, that they need, that our kids need them to have. They don't have a lot of the technology tools that they want. They don't have a lot of the other support staff. There are a lot of funding constraints and restrictions. And Carroll County has got to put all of that in perspective and come up with a plan to make the compensation more effective and to set some metrics for that and make some goals. Right now, we're very reactive to what the commissioner budget ends up being. We cannot offer teachers positions as early in the year as other counties do. There are a lot of different factors that make it very difficult, but if we can get at this and address the pay, then that's going to make a big difference. So I plan to really advocate at both the county and the state level to try to address this so that Carroll County does begin to get more of the resources that it needs to be able to solve this problem.
All right, thank you. Mr. Helton.
Okay, this is also a bit of a priority for me. One of the things that I found in talking to some of the teachers at my children's school is that they have to work a second job in order to make ends meet. That is just wrong. If you think about it, they're working all day. They go home, are grading papers, are getting prepared, spending their own money on supplies and things like that, and then are forced to tend bar on the weekend or something like that in order to make ends meet. This is not right. I mean, we need to be able to aggressively pay teachers as best we can so that we can recruit the best and the brightest and we can retain the ones that we have that are quality. You know, funding is obviously a big deal these days, but can we get creative with this? What kind of other incentives can we provide? Student loan forgiveness. I mean, is that something that can be done? I don't know. Let's explore some of these other options. Let's see what we can do to make their lives better right off the get-go so that, people will want to come here. I mean, we have some of the greatest teachers around, at least the ones in my children's school are fantastic. I don't want to see them leave. But on the same side, you're now seeing the consequences of not funding those teachers correctly. I was driving on my way home from work today to past Dunbar High School where there was a walkout because they have to let go a large amount of teachers. It's obviously a major issue. You look on the news and you see the same thing happening in Oklahoma and West Virginia and all these places where if you don't fund your teachers, you lose the education. We cannot allow that to happen. And if it means we need to figure out new creative ways of funding, then I think we need to start exploring that.
Thank you. Mr. Howard.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I accept the premise of the question because we can't solve the problem if we don't get a better deal from the state. And the simple fact is, these formulas do not come down from the heavens. They do not come down from places other than from elected officials that go down there and vote to decide how to allocate money. And I think it's interesting that we think we have a good relationship with the delegation. Our delegation brought us no money this year, nothing, to help us in education. If that's a good relationship, that's not the kind of approach I want to take. Now, they get tired of me talking about it, and I've lost some good friends over it, but the fact is, I didn't go into politics to make friends, and some people say I'm extraordinarily successful in that regard. Having said that, this is about making sure that we understand that when education is being discussed, the rubber meets the road when that excellent teacher is in front of that student. So teacher raises have got to be part of the equation. They just absolutely have to be. So we got to do a couple of things. First of all, we have got to separate the teacher negotiation from the administrative negotiation. It's not to say anybody's not important, but we absolutely have to be able to have this conversation in any organization that says if this is really where we have to ramp things up, then that's where we have to be able to get to. Second of all, we need to recognize that even just a couple percentage points is going to be on the order of $9, $10, $12 million. The commissioners need to keep the pressure on to keep funding, as we were fighting for today. We also need to make sure, though, that we're looking at other efficiencies. One of the things I'm most proud of is that about a year and a half ago, I created something called the Combined Education Commission, or Committee. We brought Board of Ed, delegation members, and the commissioners together before the budgets were set, before they went to Annapolis, to reach an agreement. It was the only year that we didn't have a contested budget in the 8 years I've been here. Unfortunately, the second time I invited folks to come, nobody from the Board of Education wanted to participate, and only one delegate did, because people struggle to be held accountable. We have got to sit down together and face the problem, and the money is there, I can tell you that.
Mr. Kiler.
Yes, the teacher's salary, I think one of the things that have hurt us here in the county is the years we went where we couldn't fund the steps and we dug a hole. Because I think overall, Carroll County has been very fortunate to attract some very, very good teachers. And we need to be grateful for that. But we need to maintain a better starter's salary and probably better steps. I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be, but we don't just hire first-year teachers. We hire 10-year teachers. And can we attract them with the steps we have now? We need to maintain the proper number of steps. And then I agree with Commissioner Howard's comment. We got to look at the state. When we talk security, it's great to hear that they made some new rules for us. But did they fund any of it? The Kerwin Commission, it's great that they want to increase teachers' salaries and work with pre-K, but are they funding any of it? We've got to push for funding from the state. The Governor Hogan now is saying the casino money will all come here. That's probably not 20% of the money needed to properly fund the schools in the state of Maryland. Now, in-house, again, with a $300 to $400 million budget, there has to be ways to also find efficiencies and pinch every penny we can also, because realistically, I don't think we're the first group to say we ought to get more money from the state, but we need to, but is it going to happen, or are we going to have to work it out for ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kowalski.
Yes, thank you. Another important question. I want to start by saying we have a lot of advantages in teacher retention. So I just want to recognize that first. We need to stay with regular step increases and salary increases. A little while back, we went 6 or 7 years, I think, without any step increases. It was just all frozen for 6 or 7 years. And when that happens, you have a real morale issue where employees, teachers just don't feel appreciated. So that should not, we need to do everything we can so that doesn't happen again. That's where you see the exodus. It's a morale issue, really big morale issue. But we have a certain advantage right off the bat that teachers who live in Carroll County prefer to work in Carroll County. Most people don't really want to commute in rush hour traffic to another county 5 days a week if they can teach in a school right here in Carroll County. So that's good right off the bat. Secondly, we have discipline issues that need to be addressed. However, compared to some surrounding counties, many teachers prefer to work. I've heard many teachers say they prefer to work in Carroll County rather than some of the surrounding counties because, by comparison, discipline problems here is not as pronounced as it can be in some other counties. So that's a huge incentive to keep teachers. Third, by nature, we're creatures of habit. Many teachers, once they're recruited, they're in our system, they like to stay. They build rapport with colleagues and families. They build routines. In fact, one of the things that irritate most teachers and sometimes causes them to quit working in that school is when they're told by administration that they have to change the grade they're teaching. A lot of teachers don't like that. They want to stay in the same grade level even. We're creatures of habit, so if we can recruit and hire good teachers that already have a connection to Carroll County, we're well on our way. But we need to make sure we send the message that they're appreciated. And one of the things I want to see with our next superintendent is more visits to our teachers, more visits to our schools. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lord.
This is the whole reason I ran for the Board of Education in the first place, was our teacher salaries. For many years, teachers did not get regular step increases or cost of living increases. They get bonuses. I'm proud to say that as a board member, every year that I've been on the board, teachers have received a raise, a step, and a cost of living increase. That has been our number one priority on the previous board that I sat on and our current board. We have been very creative with our budgets to make sure that this happens. When I say creative, we have looked at our utilities. We have looked at our insurance. But every year as we sit down at our work session and we say, what is our number one priority? It is fund our negotiated agreements. And I will say that will probably continue. We have wonderful educators in this county, incredible educators in this county, but unless we continue to take care of them, we won't. Our students are successful because of our educators, so we need to pay them accordingly. We need to take care of them. They are our greatest asset to our system.
Thank you. Ms. Allison.
Yes. Well, Carroll County Public Schools, they work very hard to maximize their budget, and it's an annual process. And as Mr. Lord was saying, the whole body becomes very creative in moving different items around, I suppose. I haven't had that experience with the school board yet, of course, but I have I'm delighted. I would love to get everybody a raise, quite frankly. But of course, the teachers they're the paramount. The educator, we fight a little harder for them, I suppose. And I intend to work carefully with the board to learn how to be as creative as possible in managing the budget.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Question came in from our audience, sort of sticking to the salary question, asking if you want competitive salaries, who do you look at for that salary level, and whether you want the same level of taxation of some surrounding counties in order to provide those salaries. So I think what they're kind of getting at is basically, would you support some sort of tax increase, recognizing, of course, that the Board of Education doesn't set that rate, but would you be supportive of that, and what other ways might you look to raise the salaries, whether it's looking at administrators or that sort of thing? And we'll start with Dr. Dorsey this time around.
Are you sure? Boy, I will just make the statement that it certainly isn't our responsibility to raise taxes, and because of that, I cannot really address what I would do other than that to take care of our compensation of our staff members. Again, it's a priority that we do provide salaries and competitive salaries for our teachers and staff members. But again, in our system, we certainly depend on the commissioners to grant us that money.
Okay, Ms. Duppen.
Yeah, again, the Board of Education does not have any taxing authority in Carroll County or anywhere else in the state of Maryland. And I also don't believe taxes are going to be raised anytime soon. I personally would be willing to take a look at paying more if I felt that we were, that it was warranted, but advocating for a tax increase is not a part of my platform. Part of my platform is to advocate for various funding bodies to say, help us figure out this problem, but come with a plan to justify why it's needed, how much we're asking for, on what kind of a timetable and time frame, and then to work together to try to figure out how to address those needs, how to take a look at how we're doing business. I'm looking forward to seeing what other new ideas other new board members have, as well as we're going to have a new superintendent that's going to have some different perspectives. And so I just don't believe trying to advocate for a tax increase can be a cornerstone of my platform, because I just don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's going to happen. So we have to do what we can to just let the funding bodies figure out how to solve the problem while pushing them to do that.
Mr. Helton.
So I agree with everyone else that, you know, it is beyond the scope of the Board of Education to really address taxes. So, you know, I think the way of dealing with this is, again, to try to find creative funding, whether that be taxes or something else. I would rather, you know, take the bull by the horns and rather than let, you know, someone else try to do it, see what we can do ourselves. On the flip side, as a parent, I personally wouldn't mind paying a few dollars more if I knew that it was helping my kid's education. You know, it's not necessarily for everyone, but I just know from my own personal perspective, you know, what is the value of your child's education? You know, if it was $5, $10, $20 a year, you know, multiplied by ever how many people who had children or how many people in the county, you know, maybe that's something to think about. Again, it's beyond my scope, though. You know, I'm just saying I personally would not mind paying a few dollars more if it meant that my kids were guaranteed a better education, and it meant that my teachers would stay here and that my programs would stay intact. But I mean, like I said, you know, the Board of Education it's beyond the scope of them to look at the taxes. We should look at ourselves and see what we can do internally, then depend on others.
Okay. Mr. Howard.
Well, sadly, those answers sound good, but really, you got to look at the fact that that's exactly why we're in the problem we're in. Board of Education members will tell you, well, we don't tax, so it's not our responsibility. Delegates will tell you, well, we don't set salaries for teachers in the school system, so it's not our responsibility. And then it converges on a Board of Commissioners that say, well, there's only so much we can do, and therefore, we have all these things that are already off the table, and we don't come to any conclusions. That's exactly what got us into this situation. The fact is, the Board of Education needs to come to the table with a budget that understands that if they're advocating for something beyond what's in the budget capabilities, which we put out 6 years in advance, then if they're advocating for a tax increase, they ought to advocate for it. And the same thing is true of where the delegation stands. In getting everybody together to have these discussions is the only way this problem gets addressed. Now, the reality is I have sat in the hot seat, and I can tell you that it is not required tax increases to meet the negotiated amounts of money for the school system. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is that when my first year in the system as a commissioner, Commissioner Rothschild and I spent a lot of time arguing about whether it should be $162 or $164 million. This year, just 7 years later, we're funding at a level that's almost $30 million a year more than we were back then. Why did that happen? Because we raised taxes? No, we would have scared off more people. Believe me, that was the strategy Maryland used for years. We reduced taxes enough to bring economic development here. You see the buildings going up all over the place. When those businesses come in, they don't tax you as citizens. They pay their fair share of taxes. We get more money, and we can do more with it. We've got to build the base of community that wants to come here. You don't do that by raising taxes. We need more community here and more businesses here. You're seeing the effects of a strategy that's worked, but at the same time, we've got to sit back and say, okay, if we're going to do this, then we've all got to buy into the strategy. So we know what to do at the school level, the commissioner level, and what we need and to know what we have to go to Annapolis to fight for. It's everybody's responsibility to be part of this discussion.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kiler.
Yeah, and I'm kind of starting off where he ended. I very much want to be on the Board of Education. I recognize they don't tax, but I am a citizen and taxpayer of Carroll County, and I'll say very loudly, we don't need to raise taxes. We need to look at the budget. We need to work with things. We dug a hole with the years that things got too tight, but we're crawling back out of it without raising taxes. The other thing, I think if you look at teachers' salaries and staff in Carroll County, statewide, it's not that bad. Yes, we need to improve. I'll adamantly say that, but it's not that bad. Now we look at Howard, Baltimore County, Baltimore City, it doesn't compare. I watch the news a fair amount. What I see happening in Howard County, what I see happening in Baltimore County in their school systems, do I want to put my kids in the Baltimore City schools? I don't think so. I'll be honest, I thank God that I'm in Carroll County and I'm part of this system. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Yes, thank you. No, I do not support a tax increase. We need to keep our eyes on increases for the teachers. Like I said, when we went 6 or 7 years without even allowing them to move up in their steps, I think that was just too much. That was quite an extreme, and really did impact morale. And we saw a lot of teachers leaving at that point. But I think one of the things we need to do, as I tried to focus on in the answer to the original question on teacher retention, is that we need to recognize that a lot of times, and I'm not saying we don't need step increases. Don't get me wrong, teachers. What I'm saying, though, is likewise, a lot of times problems can be solved, or part of the solution is not money. Okay? It's morale is connected to other issues. That's one of the reasons I said when we, hopefully we get a new superintendent, I'm hopeful that we can get better communication between our administration, our headquarters officials, to come more often into our schools, to walk through the classrooms, to shake hands with the teachers, to greet the students. And that goes, believe me, that doesn't cost a penny other than the gas it takes to drive a few miles. And that goes a long way to letting the teachers and staff know they are appreciated. And so that's what I will focus, one of my focuses. The budget is a top priority, but we need to build morale and communication with our staff and teachers. Thank you.
Mr. Lord.
So I'll repeat, there isn't a county in the state of Maryland that has taxing authority for the Board of Ed, and there shouldn't be. Our role is to build a budget that's realistic, to ask for our needs, and to present that to our local government. Their role is to make that decision of whether our request is valid or not. Now, we'll say everybody gives the commissioners a hard time, but over the past few years that I've been on the board, the commissioners have taken care of us. We've lost more from the state. And I have advocated many times in Annapolis for hold harmless funding. And that has come through. It did not come through this year. But I will say our commissioners have done much better than our state has, because the state is truly formula driven. So back to the original question, that is not the role of the Board of Ed to decide on taxes. The Board of Ed, its role is to build a budget that's realistic. And, this isn't done blindly. We know what the commissioners will bringing in. They build a 5-year budget and make that request to the commissioners. It is up to them whether they decide to fund that budget and how to fund it.
Ms. Allison.
Yes, I mean, I don't support schools raising taxes. The process that's being used is a good process. If it needs to be changed, I imagine that it would have to have some activity from the legislative body. And we could look to our delegation if we think that that's the direction we should go to help us resolve the issues at hand.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Battaglia.
Lucky me, I get to go last. So I want to rile up the crowd? No. Definitely, I do not agree with raising taxes to solve a problem with anything. I do think we can look into possibly doing some more partnerships or sponsorships with our local businesses and our corporations to kind of see what we can do about some funding, and maybe if we can release some of that funding restraint, then we can shift some of the money into the salaries. I think that's something we could probably definitely look into. That definitely would help, whether it be the different football games, baseball games, different classes that are being offered. Something definitely we can partner more with. And the small businesses in our community are so supportive of the school system, and we can definitely reciprocate that with them. I do think we need to kind of look at possibly doing salary caps in central office. Nobody attack me. It's hard to say. I mean, they do a great job, and they have they have to take care of a big area of like all schools. But I think it's something we could look into as well, and then we can maneuver money in a different direction.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Our next question, I've got a couple that have come in here that all seem to, something that's on everyone's mind is redistricting. Right now, the redistricting, I believe, as we're sitting here speaking, the redistricting and school closures committee is meeting. They're supposed to make recommendations before this next board takes office. So with that in mind, if they do indeed make recommendations, what would your thoughts be on regular intervals of redistricting or any other policies regarding redistricting sort of moving forward? And Ms. Duppen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that a new policy is already in the works to make sure that redistricting and this process happens on sort of a regular time interval. There might be other triggers written into that policy where it would be warranted to take a look sooner than, say, every 5 years or what have you. I do think that comprehensive redistricting is necessary to some degree based on a variety of parameters, and so this group is going to come forward with that. They're potentially going to be recommending additional school closures and other factors. And to me, even though if it happens on the timeline that's planned, it would not be when I would be on the board to make that decision, but that doesn't mean it will follow that timeline. It doesn't mean there won't be other factors where there's the need to take a look at that. So as far as the practicalities of that, I just feel like it's really important that there's a very thorough analysis done for any set of recommendations, that the impacts and outcomes for students and communities are outlined. If it's intended to save money, that it's very clear that it's outlined where those savings supposed to come from. What are we going to have in place to make sure that those happen? There are a variety of other factors that go into making good decisions in something that is very complicated, very difficult, very emotional for a lot of people. And so I just think that if we can get past this round of potential closures, redistricting, that's sort of the rest of pulling the Band-Aid off of what's been a very difficult time, and then we have those regular intervals set in place to look at it again in the future. I would like for us to be able to then move forward from there and talk more about students and student achievement rather than school closures and matters like this so much.
All right, Mr. Helton.
So, I'm a big fan of metrics, of using science to determine these things. And so I'm a very strong proponent of the concept of triggers. We reach a certain point, that's when we need to consider it. The big problem that I have with this is the fact that there needs to be some burn-in time from when a change is made before we immediately start looking at the option again. So a trigger is fine. That's great and all, except for the fact that, if we reach that trigger and then immediately start looking at it again, say something else is triggered, we start looking at the same problem over and over again. So now we get into this constant cycle of redistricting and closures and things like that. North Carroll closed not very long ago, and we're already looking at this again. We need to give whatever plans we have time to take effect and to see what the actual benefit of what actions were taken. Give that time before we immediately start reacting again to more to the issues. So triggers and metrics are great once you have a buffer period, once you have a time to actually properly analyze what has happened, what the decisions that were made last is, how that's going to affect the status quo. So I think by taking our time, by not rushing things, is probably in everyone's best interest at this point.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Howard.
Well, to some extent, I feel like we have a mission without a purpose. I really don't think the redistricting committee understands or could understand what it is we're asking them to do. I think the attempt to keep things so broad and so open has left us with a conclusion that not only do they have to figure out how to do it, but they have to figure out what they're doing. Are we closing schools or redistricting to save money, or to enhance the school system, or to reduce travel time? And when you put more, I'm not the greatest mathematician, I'm pretty good at math, but when you put 6, 7, 8 variables in an equation, it gets kind of hard to solve. And so to me, I think what we've got to look at is, first of all, I don't think the community benefits from any more closed schools. We had a couple of outlier situations. They were dealt with. They were very painful. I would hate to see us have to close another high school. That was a byproduct of a really bad decision made 3 or 4 boards of commissioners ago. And we had one school that was in tremendous disrepair. I fought to keep that school for a period of time. It got beyond the point where it was economically feasible, and I hated that decision. But at this point, we need to look at this and say, first of all, we got to realize that short of a high school, a little bit of redistricting, as long as it's predictable, is not going to be the end of the world. The elementary school I went to doesn't exist anymore. It burnt down, and I live to tell about it. And I will tell you, sometimes it's the parents more than the kids that are very upset about things and turn this into a much bigger issue. Having said that, what we need out of this process is predictability. We need something that says in 3 to 5 years, we're going to use this formula, this is what it's going to look like, so that if I buy a house in an area, I can predict whether or not I'm likely to be redistricted and where that's going to be. When we get there, we need to put this entire thing into a package, and we need to stop talking about buildings and start talking about building education, because we've spent way too much time on that. I learned a lot in an ugly brown rectangular building, and I had to move a couple of times. The bottom line is we need to focus on the community and the educational quality that comes out of that classroom.
All right, thank you. Mr. Kiler.
First and foremost, the current redistricting and closure plans, you can see that we've learned a little bit from the past. They are open, they are public, they are transparent, and I think that's giant. I think, unfortunately, similar teacher salaries where we didn't have the steps and we're trying to play catch up. This county system, and if we start growing, we need to look at it hard. I think in the past, most often the commissioners have found the property, and they've been able to find pretty much the poorest pieces of property in Carroll County. They save money on property, we spend it to build a school. Century's built in the wrong place. Winters Mill's built in the wrong place. Man Valley's built in the wrong place. Winters Mill and Man Valley, well, I'm not even sure Winters Mill belongs. Man Valley, that piece of property, it's so ridiculous. It's, I'll get upset if I talk about it. But we're paying for that. We should have redistricted 20 years ago. We should have done an additional in North Carroll Middle. We should have done a lot of things that we didn't do. We got to get out of the hole. We got to step up, look at redistricting, look at maybe modifying some of the grades that are in the various schools. Unfortunately, and I understand it's complex, but it's not an easy question. And maybe, as somebody said earlier, we may not be involved with it. I think we will be. I think it's complex enough. We need to make some baby steps, but we got to redistrict. We got to straighten out the mess we've caused in this county schools. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Kowalski.
Yeah, Yes, thank you for the question, another very important question, so the question is, how do you feel about redistricting?
More or less.
More or less, yeah. I think this whole issue kind of falls for me into the category of proper planning. And proper planning in our school system has been a big, big problem for quite a while. We have very, very, in my view, very poor planning. And I'm disappointed that we're now talking about closing more schools. Very disappointed. I'm not sure about redistricting, but if we see that it's needed, I'd like to see it done in a conservative way to minimize the impact on families, because it does impact thousands of families, and it can be difficult. So if we do see it needs to be done, I think we should do it in a conservative and careful, thoughtful way to minimize the impact on our families. I don't know how much time I have, 52 seconds? Thanks. So it gives me a little bit of time to touch on the issue of planning. You know, Manchester Valley, this is maybe 10 years ago, and I just want to kind of summarize here. Manchester Valley was built almost twice as big as it needed to be built, okay, based on that student population in that area. A lot of empty space in that building after $80 million of county taxpayers' dollars was spent. We didn't even get any money from the state. There were no matching funds. $80 million. And just going back to the last 3 school closings we just had, you know, we're talking about closing 3 schools, simultaneously talking about spending tens of millions, $60, $80 million on a modernization / addition to the Career and Tech Center. So how does that jive? Something's wrong with the planning. Thank you.
Mr. Lord.
So how do I feel about redistricting? Well, you know, the board has spent close to a year now of putting together work sessions so that every board member has an understanding of what it takes. Because it isn't just simple of let's move a bunch of students from one place to the other. We have to look at whether the education quality is going to remain the same. You know, are they going to have the same resources? I mean, when a building does not have the proper amount of students, they also don't have the proper amount of teachers. They don't have the proper amount of resources needed. An overcrowded building at 100% is actually perfect. It's within perfection because they have the exact number of teachers for the right amount of resources and everything. So we have now formed a redistricting committee, and they are going through all the information that we've sorted through, and they're going to come back with recommendations. I don't know what those recommendations are going to be, but we have what I feel is a very good committee that is working tremendously hard to bring us back those recommendations. And we will see come September when they present us. I don't know what it's going to be. But I do have a good understanding of what it takes to run a school efficiently with the right amount of resources needed. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Allison.
I would be real interested in talking to that redistricting committee right now. I have watched as these school closing issues has happened, and it is a daunting task and many people involved. And as Mr. Lord said, many moving parts. If I'm fortunate enough to become on the board, I will be working with the resources that the board of a group has together to help make the right decisions. That's what I'm gonna say.
Well, this is something that's always just been wonderful for me. Redistricting, it does need to be done ever so often. That's something we do need to make sure is taken care of within the county, because you will have one school that could be at 100% capacity, and just 10 miles down the road, you'll have another school that's at 65. So we do need to to look at it every so often, but we need to also check and double check the effects, and we need to make sure that when you redistrict, you have the resources available for the students that are affected, because it does affect them in the long run. And then you need to figure out, is there any savings involved? What's the amount that's going to be costing in the bus rides? Are we going to have to bring back more buses? If it's a high school, can the seniors make sure that they have their graduation requirements? Are they going to be missing any classes? When I visited Runnymede the other day, I was told that they're building 300 homes. There's a plan for it, and it's right down the street from them. And I look into the percentages for the plans for Runnymede, and it's not there. There's not a plan for a possible influx of that many students. I mean, if you got 300 homes, each home possibly could have 2 children. So they really don't have that much room to have that influx of many kids. So that's something you have to really consider. So we need to look at, is there any plans, is there any plans for the future, 10 years, 5 years, for permits? Definitely nothing over 85% in any school. I think you need to make sure you have the room for growth, and you have the room available in case something curriculum-wise comes up. So we definitely want to make sure there's no overcrowding either, because that affects the students' achievements.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Dr. Dorsey.
Districting certainly can be a tough situation to work through. I think the board's plan at this time to have it at a committee level, and it's a broad-based committee level. I think that's a right step, and I do think that this board, that this committee certainly is interested in hearing from the community. So the board is getting community input right from the very beginning, and I think that's going to be helpful. I think as far as redistricting is concerned, we do need to make sure that we have some comprehensive planning in place. I know throughout the years working in the school system, we always would come up with our actual enrollments and our projected enrollments. So we can look at projected enrollments on a yearly basis, maybe even 5 or 10 years out. However, 5 years is probably more realistic. But based on that projected enrollment, I think we certainly can come up with some comprehensive planning. And when I think back to the recent school closures, again, we entered a period of time when student enrollment was declining. And that really wasn't a surprise to the board because, again, it was predicted that during those years, from 05 to 16, that there was going to be a decline in the student enrollment. So it's actually planning all of that out. How is that going to affect us? What are some things that we'll need to have in place while we're looking at this declining enrollment? And then as we look at our comprehensive planning, as the projected enrollments are changing, certainly to make sure that we're planning for that as well. I mean, we can't close a school 1 year only to see that in 2 or 3 years we're going to need that same school again. So again, I do think the comprehensive planning is really going to be helpful, and certainly community input into the plan as well is helpful.
All right. Thank you. All right. This next question's also from our audience, and we'll start with Mr. Helton for this one. If you could change just one thing in our school system that would benefit the students, what would that be?
Wow, that's a bit of a difficult one. I think the thing that I would change, I think, yeah, I was going to say there's quite a few things. It's like, how can I pick just one? It's like a buffet. Honestly, I think, I'd have to go back to my passion project, which is technical education. I saw an infographic the other day that said that 9% of Maryland students leave Maryland schools from a technical or vocational institution. We're seeing a crisis starting to pop up. We're starting to see all of our electricians, plumbers, all these good blue-collar jobs that used to be so respected back in the 50s and 60s and 70s and so on. That population is retiring. They're leaving the industries, and they're not getting replaced. There's absolutely nothing wrong with working in a goods industry plumbers make more than I do. I mean, there's a lot of really great, successful jobs that you can have that don't necessarily require a college education. My wife has, a master's degree. We also get the statement saying that we owe about 90 grand in school loans. We're going to be paying those. I believe she'll be about 62 when we're finished paying off these loans. In my mind, I would love to see students who don't want to go that route be able to walk out of school on graduation day, having learned a trade, a career, not looking for a job, but looking for career placement in one of these great local businesses that we have here. I want to see a lot of input from our local businesses. Why can't we get some of these companies to start sponsoring some of these things and helping us? I would love to see, companies provide, entire programs if they could, because they're feeding their own workforce.
All right, thank you. Mr. Howard.
Well, to me, it's very clear what the one thing would be, and that would be to lessen the amount of standardized testing we do in the school system. I think we have an incredible amount of time and resource and limitations put on our ability to teach and affect in the classroom what we should be able to do because of the demands of standardized testing. I've been saying it for almost a decade. The state requirements to test and retest and the time we spend preparing for tests, changing curriculums to meet the new tests, all going through these cyclical changes that over the course of time don't stand the test of time, mean that we are always in a matter of flux. So we have professional development challenges. We have tremendous amounts of cost. The amount of time our students are spending either preparing for a test or in a test is extraordinary. And the fact is, it's not helping education. It really isn't. It's allowing us to be able to run a bunch of statistics that even when we review them on the Board of Ed, when I sit in as the ex officio member, we sit there and say, well, it's this, but really when you factor in that, we're not really sure what it means. And all it means is how we're testing in relation to other counties. The fact is, we have extraordinary teachers that should be allowed to teach. And our administrators know if our teachers are teaching, and our teachers know if our children are learning, and so do we. And so at the end of the day, we need to push back to the state and say, listen, getting kids ready for SATs, AP tests, and some measure of evaluation is one thing. But unless we're finding new works of Shakespeare, I don't want to change the curriculum for Brit Lit. If we're not finding new elements, however we taught chemistry 15, 20 years ago to create an entire generation of chemists, now maybe in the area of technology there are some exceptions, but if we're looking at U.S. history from the days of the colonies through the 1980s, tell me what changes in the last 5 years should be reflected in the curriculum. None. So the fact is we need to get standardized testing back into the box it belongs in, give teachers more time to teach, and give kids more time to learn. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kiler.
And I know I forget, but I think we've got to remember how resilient kids really are. I always say in our wrestling groups, the kids are smarter than the adults. But we still want to do so much for them. If I could do one thing, which is impossible, I would say, let's let the redistricting committee come up with a proposal. Let's flip a switch and make it happen in about 2 days, and everybody settle down and move on. But that's impossible. But I think we need to correct some of our past mistakes, and we need, and it's every industry. It's engineers. It's probably journalism too. There's change for change's sake. We got to do this. It's new, it's better, whatever. And we're in such a constant state of change. I don't think we ever perfect anything.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Oh, thank you. Excellent question. I had to really think about it, and I tell you, I sympathize with the gentleman down the row a little bit, because when you're the first person to ask the question, you don't have as much time to give thought to your answer. But my turn's coming. If you could change just one thing in our school system, what would it be? Well, our modern society, we're so fragmented, aren't we? We live in high population areas, and we can, especially when your kids get in high school, you might not even know your kids' teachers. Your child comes home, you don't even really know what they're going through at school, what's even happening in the school building, especially when they get into high school, and the children don't really want you there in the first place. So if there was one thing what I would change, it would be increase parental involvement. I feel passionate about that. I think it would go a long way to improving our school system. could improve our curriculum, our budget priorities, but I'm going to talk about something else that my daughter just graduated high school about 3 years ago, and I decided I was going to let her go to the high school dance. And but I wanted to kind of check out how the dance is run and exactly what happens there. So I touched base with the school officials, and I was thinking about going as a volunteer, which, just thrilled my daughter, right? High school dance. But I found out from the school officials that it had been 7 years. This shocked me. 7 years since a parent volunteer had attended a high school dance at that high school. That troubles me. That really, really troubles me. We need to get parents involved with what's happening at the dances, in the curriculum, in the budget. We need parent involvement if we want to get our school system improved. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lord.
So actually, if I was going to change one thing, I would have to agree with Commissioner Howard. It's our standardized testing. I do think that that with the park testing and stuff like that, it does not a lot to benefit the individual student, but really test the system to see how well we compare with other things. Now, I'm not completely against testing, because we do have some assessment testing that does evaluate the individual child, and those are most beneficial. We have AP testing and things like that does help that individual child. But when it comes to park and some of the Maryland standardized testing, it's really testing the system and not testing that to seeing how well that individual child does. Now, I do know that in the next few years, that is going to be changing. We're going to be changing the park. Things are going to be different. How that actually evolves remains to be seen, but there will be changes.
Okay. Ms. Allison.
Yes. This is a personal preference, and if I could change one thing, I think it would be what I've referred to as an Americanism. I've noticed that generations, probably our last 3 generations, we've kind of lost some of our way in our pride and our heritage, what we inherited from our framers. And I would like to see that more in our young people. I can ask, I've asked many of them, they don't seem to know the difference between a democracy or a republic. They're not aware of what their responsibility is going to be towards managing government, which that's for the people to do, the citizens to do. I'll read a few phrases from a definition of Americanism that I do like. Combat all anti-American tendencies, activities, and propaganda. Inculcate the ideal of Americanism in the citizen population, particularly the basic American principle that the interests of all the people are above those of any special interest or any so-called class or section of the people. Spread throughout the people of the nation the information as to the real nature and principles of American government. Foster the teaching of Americanism in all schools. Work for the education of prospective American citizens and alien residents in the principles of Americanism.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Battaglia.
I would personally like to say food. Anybody had that pizza lately? It's like cardboard. Oh. Ugh. No, I think seriously wise, I think testing is definitely the one thing. Students are definitely a lot more stressed now than they were before. And I mean, I know with my daughter, like she's already like, I have park. And I'm like, oh, it'd be okay. It's fine. Just do your best. It's not life or death. Just do what you can. So I think it's something we definitely need to do is do something about the testing in our schools, the standardized testings. But honestly, I think we also should be asking the students themselves.
Dr. Dorsey.
Well, that's a tough question because I know that kids are at varying levels and come with certainly their own individual, their own individuality, so to speak. So in order to change one thing that would benefit every student, I was just sort of thinking along the lines of preparedness. If they would all have a certain level of preparedness and readiness for learning, whether they're at the upper level or the lower levels. Again, if they could just present themselves with some level of preparedness, and then it would become the job of the teachers and the educators to really work with the students and take them a step further. So I'm really interested in all of our students attaining success and reaching achievements. And again, I feel that if they can be prepared and ready to move forward, I think we do have the teachers who can take them a step further, which is what I would want for them.
Okay. Finally, Ms. Duppen.
To talk about something that hasn't been brought up, as I've been visiting the schools and talking to a lot of principals and interact with educators in other capacities, I think that the one thing that I would change or really make sure was given to our schools is technological tools. I would make sure that there were technology devices available to every student. I think that comes to them where they are. I think that's modern. I think that that adds flexibility for some of the other opportunities for teachers to get creative in the classroom, the curriculum. It would give us an opportunity to not have students using their own devices for some of the tools that they use in classrooms, so that the phones and social media could be totally off when they're in older grades. And that would just put a lot more resources in teachers' hands, in students' hands, at every grade level across the system.
Okay, very good. All right, this next question, there was a group that recently went before the Board of Education accusing the Carroll County Public School Administration and staff of having a liberal political bias. Do you believe a political bias exists in the classrooms, and why or why not? And if you do, how would you address it? And we'll start with Mr. Howard.
I mean, I would have to say that probably not necessarily from a system-wide standpoint, but I think I've sensed that there probably is bias there. I mean, I think when we were going to school, when we were younger, you very seldom heard individual teachers' personal life stories, personal perspectives about. The only thing you ever knew about a teacher was if they were expecting, because that couldn't be hidden for very long from the students. So sometimes I hear about these discussions that go on in the classroom, and I have concerns. I look at some of the curriculum that we're using, and I think there's been a strong effort nationwide to try to kind of tell a different story with some of the history and some of the things like that. For the most part, I think our teachers do an excellent job. But I think if I was to look at it and say, you know, do we lean in any direction? I think part of that is that we do. What I think the solution to that, though, is I think more of the process, more of the materials, more of the content needs to be driven locally. I think public education was always intended to be a derivative of the community that it served. I don't think it was ever supposed to be a statewide enterprise or a national endeavor. I believe it was supposed to really reflect the community that it was in. I think when we make extra efforts to make sure that happens, and I know we do some things to make sure that some of that finds its way in, I think we do a good service to our community. When we stray from that, I think we probably run into some challenges where things are not necessarily what some folks might expect to find. And so I think it's something that we do a pretty good job of. I think we could probably work on it, and I think we could do a better job in the future.
Okay, Mr. Kiler.
And I tend to agree. I do not think it's a big, broad-range school system problem. But like it or not, we all have our personal bias. And I think in today's world, more and more of that gets talked about to the kids, sometimes appropriate, sometimes not. I do think we need to look hard at curriculum and keep it, our history should be our history. And, like I majored in math, and a lot of the guys nailed a lot of that stuff hundreds of years ago. And so you shouldn't have to change how you're teaching some of it. Yes, we need to adapt and change, but I think the curriculum, we need to make sure we're teaching the facts. And I think we need to make sure if some classroom gets out of kilter with too much political or personal or whatever discussions to the kids, then we need to nip it in the bud. The administration needs to take care of that. But I don't think it's a broad range problem. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Kowalski.
Yes, thank you. Another very good question, I think. So thank you for that, Mr. Carter. Does a liberal political bias exist in our schools? Yes, I think it definitely does, and I think it's a function of the fact that we have nonpartisan elections for Board of Ed. I think that plays into it. You know, when you run for Board of Ed, you don't have to say if you're Republican or Democrat. And I know a lot of people say, well, that's a way of keeping politics out of education, and I tend to think it has the opposite effect. I think what it does is kind of keep the public in the dark, and you don't see these kinds of issues come up to the forefront. You really don't even know the people you're voting for, what their position is on how our children should be taught about patriotism, about the history of our nation and such. I'm trying to watch my time there. And all kinds of things are happening in our school system that parents don't really know about. That's why I'm a big advocate on parental involvement. And maybe getting, you have to say a little more. Say whether you're Republican or Democrat, and not that you should be automatically excluded because you're one party or another, but just say maybe just a little more about how you feel about this kind of an issue. And I'm concerned also about sex education. It kind of falls into this category of the liberal political ideology. What's happening in our sex education in our classes? You know, my daughter just graduated from high school just a couple years ago, and sex education goes on for a long time. I don't know how many hours it is, but it's weeks. I think weeks of 90-minute lessons, and they talk about all kinds of things in there. And I think maybe 1 or 2 lessons, stick to the basics, but not weeks and weeks. Leave that up to the parents and get parents more involved in the sex education, what's going on with that. So parental involvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lord.
So the reason the Board of Ed is a nonpartisan position is to keep politics out of education. Politics does not belong in education whatsoever. Do I believe that there's a liberal bias? Well, that'd be saying that most teachers are liberal. You know, I have been around classrooms, visited schools, and I know a few teachers personally. I know their political views, but I have never walked into a classroom and said, wow, they're really teaching a very pointed political view here. So no, I don't believe that it is an ongoing problem. I believe that every once in a while in a conversation that might come out as being a liberal view, a conservative view, or what. But politics definitely does not need to be in our school system, does not need to be on our Board of Ed. And I truly believe that in our schools, our teachers are respectful of keeping their political views to themselves because they are professionals. And that is their job, is to keep their personal beliefs and teach the facts of what is there.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Allison.
As far as the political bias in the classroom, no, from our young students and teenagers, they need to know how our government functions, proper civics and history, so that they can be prepared to get involved in politics. They'll have a good foundation when they get out of the high school and start making their adult decisions. But yes, I have heard stories, had a number of people tell me that they've had problems with between student and child in the school, and have mentioned some of those to me. And of course, I think the school dealt with it well in this instance, and it doesn't belong in our K-12 classrooms.
Okay, very good. Ms. Battaglia.
I think there's some, but it's not in the actual classrooms. A lot of it is social media led, especially by our middle schoolers and our high schoolers. They see it on social media and it's like the cool thing to do, whatever it might be that week. We just need to make sure the curriculum is taught correctly as far as the history, the science, the civics, both sides of everything. Our SGA, our Student Government Association, is incredible in our middle and high schools. Make sure the students get involved. They can talk about their, how they feel about a different, whatever might be going on that time, whether it might be the walkouts or whether it is the school shootings. Clothing, attire. I mean, those type of things those open up for SGA for the students to be able to discuss how the school environment makes them feel. And I think that's something we really need to look more at is, get involved with our SGAs to see how our students are doing within the school environment.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Dorsey.
First of all, I do not believe that political bias exists in our classrooms. I think our teachers are very careful to make sure that they keep politics and their own political views out of their classrooms and out of the teaching of their students. I must say that we did have a recent board meeting, and it was certainly hard to sit through that meeting, hearing all of the accusations made that there is this political bias in our schools. So again, it's just unfortunate that sentiment was a prevalent one during that evening. But again, the bottom line is that, no, I do not believe that there is a political bias in our schools.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Duppen.
Thank you. I don't think that there's a big issue with it, but I'm not going to claim to fully know the answer to that either, because I'm not on the receiving end of formal reports or complaints about what's happening in the classrooms. My own children grew up going to Carroll County schools. I don't believe political bias was really a big issue as far as at a systemic level, as far as teachers. Every once in a while, something's potentially going to get through, but I think that one's experience of potential bias is a factor of a couple of different things. It's a factor of what is your own position. I think that people that tend to perhaps live at the extremes politically think that the rest of the world is not where it should be from their viewpoint, wherever you might be on the spectrum politically. And personally. So no, I don't really think that that is a big issue. But if there is a question, a legitimate question, then there are ways to go about trying to assess and investigate that and find out and then figure out what measures you need to take as a result. However, I do think that it is appropriate, especially at the higher levels, and something that I think is missing in our society today and very much needed, is some respectful and rational discourse and conversation. And as you start getting into the higher levels, I think that students start becoming more politically aware. It's very natural that they're going to be, and they're going to want opportunities to explore those thoughts and those ideas. And some of the things that were accused of bias were really student-led. You had a lot of students that were thirsting for opportunities to have conversations and to explore issues that they wanted to explore. And I think it would be great if all of our students had more opportunities to pursue opportunities for discourse. And if we all understood each other a lot better, I think that we would not see bias everywhere to the degree that we might be inclined to.
Very good. All right, Mr. Helton.
Okay, so I come from a little bit of a different background in that my kids are young. They're in elementary school, so they really don't talk a lot about politics, except for like what's served at lunch and things like that, as political as that gets. My personal belief is that I would hope that there is no inherent bias in the system. It's a teacher's job to leave out their personal politics, but it is also their job to be able to, again, encourage debate and discussion in a rational way. To play devil's advocate, it may sound like, a bias, but I had a really great history teacher back when I was in high school, and he was a staunch Republican, but he could flip it and play the other side just to get discussion, just to show you that there were two sides or more to every story. And we really need to focus on that civil-based discussion. The world has changed so much, and if you look at the technology of social media, People are comfortably throwing snowballs, so to speak, from behind keyboards where they're safe. We need to teach kids that they can speak to each other and have rational debates and discussion without taking it personally, without turning into a fight, without name calling and bullying and internet memes and things like that. And so by pushing for teachers to actually go out and encourage, like Muri said, discourse, actual conversation and discussion, and with that teacher being able to manage that discussion, to moderate it, to play both sides, to show the different perspectives, I think is a huge benefit to the students, because any child who grows up is never going to get along with every other single person. They're not going to share the same beliefs as everyone they work with. You can surround yourself in your own circle of like-minded people, but you have to interact with people outside of that like mind, and you need to learn how to do that.
Okay, thank you. All right, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll get to the closing statements. So the last question, again, another one submitted from our audience, and we'll start with Mr. Kiler. How will you make sure that all students are provided the same opportunities? This includes capacity levels in schools, as well as course selection and availability. So how would you make sure that all students have the same educational opportunities?
I think it's hard. I think we need to focus, and I think we've lost focus a little bit in this county. We've been going through school closures and money, and we beat on all that, and we forget the kids that we're here to serve. And it just seems, and I know I was biased as a parent. If I had 10 kids and the first one was off the charts, then I wanted gifted and talented. If the second one was special needs, I wanted special needs, and I could have cared less if they had gifted and talented. But somehow we need to look at the whole picture. Every student's important, and every student's need's important. And I think we forget that when we're fighting over all the how we're going to fund it and how we're going to make it happen, which is a whole nother subject. It's great to say, well, we need better special education. We need to make sure that every kid that wants to be a welder can get in that class. But we also need to fund it, and we need to make it happen. And it's hard. Hopefully it's not impossible, but it's hard. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Kowalski.
Thank you. Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. It was, how would you make sure that all students have the same educational opportunities? This includes capacity levels as well as course selection and availability.
Capacity, course, and availability. Well, I don't think we can guarantee that all students have, the identical or exactly equal opportunities, but we certainly need to strive in that direction. And I think one of the ways is through professional development of our teachers. It's pretty hard being a teacher. They've got maybe 20, 30 kids in the class, all different kinds of families. Some students, very struggling students, some gifted students, just all over the spectrum. And if we can do everything we can to support those teachers in knowing how to meet the needs of all the students in their class, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum, that's real important. And another way, as I keep coming back to parental involvement, is getting the parents in the school. In some of our communities, some of our neighborhoods, parents are kind of. Some parents, maybe when they were in school, didn't have the best experience. Maybe they were a struggling student and they kind of have a little discomfort about going to the school. And one of the things I did when I was on the Family and School Partnership Committee was, in those kinds of communities, we went out at the bus stops in the morning, and we proactively went out to meet the parents, didn't wait for them to come to the school. And we'd stand at the bus stop in the morning and just say hi to the parents and let them know that we want their involvement, let them know what kinds of activities were coming up in the school, and proactively creating that bond. We had a community play day. We went out into the little playground in the community, and the parents and children, the whole families, the toddlers and all, they came and interacted with the with us. And so parental involvement and teacher professional development. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Lord?
So how would I make sure that students all have the same opportunity, capacity, and course offerings? So this runs back to some of the policies that we put into place about redistricting, also the redistricting committee that's looking at things now. As a school is filled to a certain amount of capacity, they have more resources available, which also means more course offerings. As the school falls to a certain threshold, they no longer have that capacity they need to support that one class. We faced that issue many years ago with the North Carroll Manchester Valley. We were busing students from one school to the next just so students can take a certain class. So there needs to be a capacity level that allows all classes to exist. Now, this is not going to be completely equal across the county because there's also that involves student interest. If you've got a group of students in one school that is, that would really like Latin, but nobody in the South Carroll area would like to take Latin, then how can you exactly say that we're going to offer the same courses? So student involvement, student interest drives those factors also. So I think that with policy changes, as we have changing our boundary adjustment policy, and that isn't an automatic thing to say we get to a certain point, that's it, we're just going to redistrict. That's not what it says. It says we're going to look at those things, and we're going to take all those factors into consideration. What should be done? Is there going to be educational opportunities for our students? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
There's a good teachers definitely can identify the different desires or learning skills or ability or interest of students. We also have testing that can help identify what a student needs, but there's no cookie cutter. Each student has got their own direction and encouraged to grow with the basic fundamental tools that we teach them in school. So I don't, kind of know how to answer the question as far as how would I make sure all students have the same educational opportunity, because you have to consider the variety of the student you're dealing with and identify those. I suppose, someone mentioned we couldn't have a class for every personality desire of what someone imagines as a child, what they're going to do in their future. But the requirements between the elementary, secondary, and upper schools have to be adapted to age-specific groups and keep their individual ambitions in mind.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Battaglia?
So one way that this really could be implemented is by allowing schools to make sure they all do the same things. For instance, some elementary schools will decorate for holidays and some don't. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is you had a soccer game, you got Joey and you got Grady over here, and Grady's like, hey, we celebrated Christmas at school, and Joey's like, what? I didn't do that. So to me, I think it'd be really important if we could at least implement some type of the culture of holidays into our schools. That helps create diversity and that helps prevent bullying. Those two things are so important in our schools, and it helps open our minds and the children's minds, and they're a little more accepting and understanding to things. If anybody's had potato latkes, let me tell you something, delish, okay? So when you have a Jewish family come in and make potato latkes, you smell it and you're like, yeah. Things like that the students love, and those type of things can be worked in the curriculum, so that does give the opportunity for some type of consistency for the students, especially at elementary age. Field trips is another thing. There are ways that we could work with all the schools, so, they could have proper planning. So you have, let's say, Man Valley's going to Annapolis, and so is Liberty. Okay, well, let's kind of like work out a bus system here, and we can kind of cut down the cost. So I think field trip consistency is extremely important as well, because that helps broaden the education experience for a student.
Okay. Dr. Dorsey.
Well, as far as providing educational opportunities for students, again, we try to match them with where they are, so to speak. So it may not look like they're all getting the same thing, but they're certainly getting what's needed. And on a daily basis, teachers are planning and delivering instruction to really address the needs of all students. And then as the students progress throughout the school system, again, they take a look at what might be in their future, whether they're going to move forward and pursue college or careers, whether they'll get out and join the workforce and seek different jobs or work in different businesses, or whether they're even going to become members of the military. So again, students sort of choose their own pathway for success based on their needs or what they feel their aptitude happens to be at that time. So again, I think for us as a school system, we just need to certainly make sure that we have all possible venues covered, so to speak, regardless of which path a student is interested in seeking, that we have those opportunities for success built into our programs.
All right. Ms. Duppen.
Would you read the question one more time, please?
Sure.
If
Maybe.
you already buried it, I'll do my best to remember.
Essentially, it was, what can we do to make sure that, here you go. How will you make sure that all students have the same educational opportunities, including capacity levels, as well as course selection and availability?
Okay, thank you. So I think that part of what this gets at is if we talk about capacity levels, schools are identified as having some sort of functional capacity. How can that building be used, and where is the school overall? There aren't necessarily ideal targets, but for example, 85% utilization of a school is often considered a good one, and that you're going to be at a good place where you're going to have enough students to offer enough variety of classes to fill those classes. When you're at 100% capacity, you run into situations where perhaps even though you're at a higher capacity, so you're going to have classes offered, those classes might fill up, and then you have too many students and not enough opportunity. And on the flip side, if your school is more under capacity, say 65%, then you're not going to have the students necessarily to have all the same opportunities. So a lot of people talk about balancing enrollments to try to address that, move people around so that you have closer to, say, 85% everywhere. And it's worth trying to take a look at that and seeing if you can achieve that. That's part of what redistricting can try to achieve, and it's very much worth looking at that. But when you drill down, you still have to take into consideration what are you going to do in terms of bus rides? Because then you take opportunity away from a student to a degree, because now they have longer bus rides for the sake of getting to the schools to balance the enrollments. So it's a difficult balancing act, but what I'll drill down on a little bit for my answer is when you talk about course selection specifically, that's really at the high school level. And I'll talk about at the Career and Tech Center, for example, we have some programs that are so popular that a lot of students are turned away. And so then that is not necessarily equitable opportunity based on the interest. So if we just look at Career and Tech Center, for example, I think that we can look at, are there some options of having more in classrooms at the schools? Are there distance opportunities? Are there summer opportunities? But I think sitting down and brainstorming and then plotting out and figuring out some ways to address that is worthwhile.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Helton.
Okay, so honestly, in our current setup, it's not possible. We are set up by different areas, and there's different populations and all that kind of stuff. So what we can do to fix that is we need to offer, first and foremost, the same base education at a very high quality at all of our schools. We have all these electives and things like that. We can sit here and address those things in very creative ways. One of the things that I've seen a lot used lately, e-learning. Somebody mentioned earlier about wanting to take Latin. How cool would it be if students from all over the different schools were able to remote in and actually go take a Latin class from a computer lab working together? You know, trying to specialize our schools to be jacks of all trades is not necessarily the way to go. If you want to look at a really good example of people who were trying to really focus on some of this specialized education, look at Baltimore County and the Magnet program. They've done a lot of really interesting things down there that has been worked pretty well from everybody who I've talked to. A very good friend of our family was a principal down there. You know, we get creative to try to equalize things by looking at new and different ways of doing things, but we still have to remember to focus on the base education. Everybody has to come out of our schools knowing English, knowing math, knowing the basic sciences. That's what's going to get them, you know, make them successful in colleges when they really get to explore and branch out and try new things. So, you know, honestly, we need to stop trying to turn our students into cookie cutter imprints like in Pink Floyd's The Wall. Sorry, referencing my age here. But, you know, the fact of the matter is every student is different, every school is different. We have to focus on how we can give everybody the opportunities without having to change their lives dramatically. So.
All right, thank you. Mr. Howard.
Well, I think the equality of educational opportunity is different than some of the specific things that were mentioned, and I agree with those that have said it is truly a balancing act. The hallmark of great education is that teachers and administrators and support meet students where they are and bring them where they're able to go. And that's something that I think Carroll County Schools does extraordinarily well. I think this is actually one of the areas, I'm going to say actually, this is one of the areas where our school system does a very good job. You're always going to have some disparity because as soon as you improve someone's science lab or bring some new technology in, you know, there's other schools that are now a couple years behind. That's the nature of a system the size of ours. By the same token, though, I think more of it has to do with excellent teachers, the opportunity to teach, and the culture. And one of the things that I think some folks struggle with, but I think our system does very well, is the idea of moving people around. One of the practices I most like, because I have been a little critical, that I most like about our Board of Education and the meetings that they have is when they highlight things the teachers are doing in the classroom and they show us some of the videos and some of the very fun and innovative things because we can best learn from each other. Those best practices should be pervasive throughout the system. And I think we do an extraordinary job of that. If there are some technical things that we decide that a minimum set of offerings needs to be there, then that's something we should absolutely make sure that's fleshed out and given to the redistricting committee, because there are certain things you can't do, as we experienced when we went through the difficult discussion about North Carroll High School, when you have schools that reach a capacity level that's just too low. But at the end of the day, it really needs to be about, do we have the personnel, the right training, and the right amount of time to be able to meet that student where they are and get them where we can get them to be, based on their desire and based on their capability.
Okay, very good. All right, at this time, we're going to wrap up with a 1-minute summary statement from all of the candidates. And we're going to start with Ms. Kowalski.
Okay. This is my turn. All right, thank you. My name is Mary. Thank you. My name is Mary Kowalski, and I'd like to again thank the sponsors of this debate. Our Board of Ed faces many difficult and challenging issues. I believe I have the education, experience, passion, and commitment that's needed. After many, many years of involvement as an employee, a parent, an involved citizen, if I'm elected, I'll focus on proper planning in our capital budget. The lack of proper planning is wreaking havoc on our budget, and I'm concerned about that. I think something's seriously wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong at the Board of Ed. You know, they're closing schools, building schools. Closing schools, building schools. Why? They built New Windsor Middle. It was only 20 years old. They shut it down. Now they want to put a $80 million addition modernization on career and tech. Something's wrong. We need to get to the bottom of what's going on there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lord.
Thank you. I'd like to close with my remaining year of my term. I have 4 goals. They're working with our new superintendent, completing the work of the Redistricting and School Closure Committee, planning the modernization of the Career and Technology Center, and the completion of our strategic plan. The plan will be the foundation and framework that will lead the increased learning for all students. It will be a CCPS guide for years to come. I'm very proud the role of the board and the community played in developing our strategic plan and guiding values. If re-elected, I will continue to focus on compensating our hardworking employees, attracting and recruiting minority educators, increasing learning for all students with the use of research and data to close the achievement gap. I will continue to remain a good steward of our tax dollars provided by the county and the state. I will continue to focus on getting good return on the money we spend as our projects move forward. I ask for your continued support to keep our school system strong for all and current and future students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Allison.
Yes. I wanted to thank the Media Center and the Carroll County Times for this nice event. They've done a wonderful job. And of course, my major concern, I have spent quite a bit of time reading and studying the process that is involved in being a member of the Board of Education. I've been through the Student Services Manual, the Board of Education Handbook, the Master Plan, and it's very well organized, but I am hoping that we can look at what we've produced and get more Americanism and get our people more, and get our teaching more with the civil and history that should be taught in our schools.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Battaglia.
First, I would like to thank you guys, the Carroll County Times, you, Wayne, and the Community Media Center for this opportunity this evening. As a mom and as a wife and as a community member, I promise to advocate for all children. It does not matter where they live in this county. I promise to advocate for every single child, every single family member, and every single community member. Because without you, we would not have our schools. We would not have children to have in our schools. Those key components, that is what is most important. Real quick, favorite quote, and this means a lot to me, and it's the exact truth. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And I honestly believe that every single day, that unless someone truly cares and is willing to stand up and put their foot out there, that's the type of person that you want to represent you.
All right, thank you. Dr. Dorsey.
First, I too would like to thank the Community Media Center and the Carroll County Times for conducting tonight's forum as a public service to our residents of Carroll County. And Wayne, thank you as well for moderating this evening's forum, and especially thank you for helping with our time there. That's been very valuable. The questions you've asked tonight and issues raised throughout this evening confirm that there are a number of challenges facing our school system. It is important that our community elect individuals to the Board of Education who not only celebrate and appreciate the strengths of our system, but who are committed to finding solutions to the challenges. We need persons who are prepared with the experiences and expertise to move our system forward. I am such a candidate. And for the Board of Education, I would appreciate your vote for Patricia and Dorsey. I feel that I'm prepared, experienced, and certainly dedicated to the students, staffs, and communities of Carroll County.
Thank you. Ms. Duppen.
Thank you, Mr. Carter, fellow candidates, everybody here. This is an important and exciting time for Carroll County Public Schools. There's a lot going on, and just from tonight with these questions, we really barely scratched the surface of everything that's going on. I think the Board of Education members must simultaneously understand the roles and responsibilities of their position, take them very seriously, be tough in the face of daunting challenges and potentially harsh criticism, be enthusiastic champions of our schools, inspire and earn public support and confidence while always ensuring that students remain the primary focus and top priority of all decision-making. And it's also important to have a little bit of fun along the way. I think I'm up to the task. I view this campaign as both a job interview and preparation for the position. I aim to prove that I am a great choice for the Board of Education, and I intend to try to do a great job. Again, my name is Muri, and I respectfully ask for your vote in the primary this June. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Helton.
All right, well, now that the stage fright's out of the way, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out here. I'll be frank, I do not have all the answers, and I'm not going to pretend that I do. There's so many daunting tasks at hand for the schools. But I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to have my eyes opened and to hear what you're concerned about and what your students are concerned about. Again, I'm just a parent. I don't have any fancy letters in front of my name or have lots of years teaching. But what I do have is compassion. I care for my own kids, and I care for all the kids, who are going to be attending these schools. And, I think that it's that compassion that I can bring to this job that will make me somebody worth considering. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Howard.
Well, thank you for the time tonight. I believe it is the highest responsibility of our community to provide excellent education. And I believe that we can build on a very good school system, but I think there's room for improvement. I believe I'm uniquely qualified to help build on the success of the Carroll County school systems, lead the board in a new direction, and also advocate very strongly for our schools. And it would be an honor to serve on the Board of Education. In some regards, you might say I could be the best of candidates and the worst of candidates. It really depends on where you want to go. I will tell you, if you want to stay the course, if we're comfortable with standardized testing, if we'll take what the state will give us and rest easily on that, I'm not worth the trouble. I'm really not. At the end of the day, if you want someone that's going to put teachers and students first, that's going to make sure we have more time to teach and we compensate those teachers, that our students have an excellent school experience, and that we go out and create the programs and the resources, safe schools, and the right curriculum to create an excellent school system, I believe I could be very helpful, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Kiler.
Thank you for this event and the opportunity to be here. I was going to do a little closing speech, and I just scrapped it. I'd rather summarize tonight. It's been some great questions and some great answers. I think we all agree that we have some great teachers. We need to compensate them fairly, and while doing that, continue to attract new and other good teachers. We need to look hard at testing. One of the biggest questions I get asked is, why can't we add this? Why can't we add that? Well, I feel like saying, well, do you want to make school an hour longer? We need to really optimize the time we have. I heard a lot tonight about parents. Unfortunately, not every kid has good parents. We need to look hard at counselors and working with parents. We need to learn to agree to disagree. That seems to have gone by the wayside. And I'm running out of time, so thank you very much, and I challenge everybody here. You guys care. Let's get the rest of the community to care. Thank you.
All right, thank you. At this time, we'll turn it back over to Mr. Richard Turner.
So for specific air times and specific dates, please check out our website, so you'll get all those details. But before we leave, we want to encourage everyone to make sure that you have registered to vote. There is the opportunity, of course, you want to be able to register by the June 5th deadline. And voting is not just a right, it's our responsibility. And it's an important part of what we do in our civic duty in ensuring that our leadership reflects our views and our opinions and our policies. So with that, every vote counts. And please take the time to learn more about all of the candidates who are running in the 2018 primary. So be sure to get out and vote on June 26th. Thank you again to the Times, and have a good evening.